No mai, haere mai, te whānau. Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Gauri and I'm a staff member here at Community Research. Thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar titled Racism, Community, Art, and Social Change. I'd like to bring us together this morning with a karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa punamo te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. May peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for all of us this day. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, bind us all together. Good morning, everybody. Community Research is so pleased to welcome three researchers this morning, Bev Cho Hong, Grace Wong, and Grace Gassin. Each presenter will introduce herself and her interest and involvement with the Aotearoa poster competition. This competition focused on Chinese Kiwis living in Aotearoa. There will be a short presentation and then I'll have a korero with Grace Wong, Bev Cho Hong, and Grace Gassin. And then it's over to you to share your responses to the kaupapa and ask our panelists questions. We'll be recording this webinar, including the chat. So remember, you can ask a question by typing into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Before we move to the presenters, I invite you to watch a short video about the finalist posters. Bev, when you're ready.
Let's work together for the good of all. How many hands will make light work? Unity is strength, we'll get what we need. With love and respect, let's show kindness to all. We're all in this together. We're all in this together.
Thanks, Bev. I'm really pleased today to have three wonderful researchers with us, Grace Wong, Bev Cho Hong, and Grace Gassin. And I'll let them introduce themselves, so I'll just hand over to Bev.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Bev Cho Hong toka whenua, no Nam Chong Bak Tong Guangzhou Aho. Engari I whanau toka papa I te whanganui a Tara. I whanau aho I Hawara, Narira, kia ora koutou. Kia ora everyone, my name's Bev Cho Hong, and yeah, I love seeing those finalist posters and the background music, which was especially composed, and the two different, well, the four languages, English, Te Reo Māori, but also in Mandarin and Cantonese as background waiata composed by Scott Roy, as well as the involvement of others. I'd firstly just like to really thank Community Research for hosting this webinar and giving us the opportunity to share the kaupapa and the mahi of what occurred and the story of how things went and some of the lessons we learnt, both personally and as a team in running this competition. Gauri and Janie and the rest of the crew, it's really fabulous to have this kind of forum and to be able to present at this webinar. I'd also like to thank everyone who has turned up to listen to us, and also to Grace Wong and Grace Gassin for co-presenting with me about this work and this kaupapa. I think, as you'll have seen at the end of the finalist posters there, such a huge array of different approaches, but also the last two slides, there were many collaborators in this project, and it was very much an evolving and dynamic and collaborative mahi in terms of how it progressed and its success in engaging and resonating with people. I'm actually just going to talk a wee bit about my motivations to act and what brought about this project, and some of, I guess, the key elements of it which were really important to me as it progressed. So I've been working in the public sector space as a researcher for 2 to 3 decades, let's say, and it was in my childhood and in my upbringing various elements of racism, systemic and individual, but it was actually 3 years ago now, in 2018, when I was doing a project where I was actually facilitating workshops nationwide as part of a consultation of recent migrant experiences. And the workshops were set up to be family friendly, so we had a table with drawing and all sorts of things for children to come along and participate, while the parents and caregivers spoke to us in focus group conversations. And we had kai and drink, and at one stage a young Chinese boy came up to me and said, "Oh, Mum said I better come and help you clear stuff into the kitchen," as as you do. And when I took him out to the kitchen and I was loading the dishwasher, he just stopped me and he looked at me and he said, "Why do they hate us so much?" Just one clear statement. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he talked about being bullied at school. He talked about not wanting to mention it to his mum or dad because he didn't want to worry them. They had so much on their plate anyway in terms of being recent migrants. And then he talked about, another Chinese student had arrived in his class, a Chinese girl, and that now there were two of them, you know, so they would be fine because they were together. And that really, really resonated with me. That really struck me quite hard, because I felt like, how come nothing's changed? You know, I'm much older now than when I was at school, and how comes nothing has changed? And that actually stuck with me. It really hit me in the heart. And then, take a couple of years further along, and as you know, we had COVID, the pandemic, in the early stages where there was a lot of anti-Chinese and anti-Asian rhetoric. And actually, I'm a single mum with a teenage son, so he would have been 16, 17 at the time. And he came and he just said to me, "Mum, what's happening?" He said, you know, online, he said, yes, there's the business as usual kind of racism that you see, anti-Chinese racism, but he said, this really has ramped up. And he basically said, I'm really worried. I don't want this to become the new normal online. And we had a chat about it, and I could see that he was really concerned about it, which really kind of shocked me. And I think there has been a normalizing, and even in conversations I've had with this element of normalizing. And then at that time, an artist, Bruce Mahalski, actually got in touch with me, and we were talking about it, and he suggested the idea of a poster art competition. And I kind of reacted. I really liked the idea, but, and this is the but, for me, and in the discussions with him, it was, love it, but it's a community initiative. It's the voice of the Chinese communities. And unless a whole lot of things line up, we can't go ahead with this. As much as we want to, we can't go ahead with this. It needs to be a community initiative. And it was those things lining up which really built the success of the Aotearoa poster competition. And that was the project team. I had worked with Grace previously, brought on Bernard Guerin, who's a professor in social psychology. I had worked with him as a lecturer at Waikato. And Brittany Young, who's, I know her through the Wellington Chinese Sports and Cultural Centre, so she's in her early 20s and has done graphics and arts. And then later on down the piece, even with Grace Gassin coming on board into Papa. I mean, it really was an evolving narrative. And Grace will talk a bit later about, you know, the connect with different communities, but there was something there that resonated. There was something there about the voice that worked really well in terms of this project. So I'm fourth generation Chinese living in New Zealand. And one of the things, I guess, as a strategy, I guess for me, and it was, you know, don't make a fuss, keep your head down, work hard. You know, people will see that you're contributing. So just let the rest go over your heads. And I think to some extent it was me, there was a feeling for me that had rendered us invisible in a way, and that as communities we just needed to show up, and if we could, you know, provide something public, national and visible communities, and my son and, you know, a young Chinese boy could see and would resonate with them and give them some sort of sense of empowerment. I think that's about all I'm going to say from an introductory angle. I was going to keep my eyes on the clock in terms of minutes, but I have lost the plot on that, Gauri, so I haven't spoken for too long. So kia ora everyone, and I'm going to invite Grace Wong to say a few introductory words. Kia ora, Grace.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko whenua te maunga, ko waitamata te moana, Ngāti Hanama, tōku iwi, ko Grace Wong Luk Laufong, tapu ingoa, no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Grace Wong. My great-grandfather came to Aotearoa from China in the 1870s, and my mother's parents were born in Wellington and Hawera in 1900. My father was born in China. He came to live here after working with a New Zealander, Vernon Grace, who was a civil engineer helping with the reconstruction of China after World War II. And I'm named Grace after him. I first met Bev when I was on a Families Commission board, which she ran as part of her role there. It was comforting to actually meet someone Asian, in fact Chinese, who was nearer my age, but much younger, of course, who felt the same way about Te Tiriti as I did. and who had internalized and incorporated it into both her work and into her thinking about her identity as a Chinese New Zealander. Thus, I was drawn to the poster competition because it drew together two of my long-standing interests, Te Tiriti and achieving social justice through addressing structural and personal racism, which I observe every day, everywhere. It never goes away. It hasn't got better, but I think we're less scared to put our hands up now because the times have changed and moved on, thank goodness. And as a health promoter and community member and researcher, I've always liked grassroots projects and action and preferred social change projects. So I hope to help grow the Te Tiriti-based social justice movement in my own small way through my involvement in this project and in other areas of my life. And I acknowledge and applaud the amazing work of all of you and others in this space. And if I can help in any way, just please do get in touch. I'll pass over now to Grace Gassin.
Thanks, Grace. Kia ora koutou. No haina me marehia me uropi o ko tupuna I tipu ake o ki tamake makoro e noho ana o ki ponake. Wasin lim, kiu lim so jin, inui wasi Hokkien lang ko si amo lang, so I wae laupu hoa jire amo mia si Grace. No reira tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Grace Gassin, and I'm a second generation Malaysian Chinese New Zealander of mixed Chinese Pākehā heritage. I was raised largely by my mum, my ama or grandmother, and our Hokkien Chinese family. And so I think this is probably the core of my long-standing and wide-ranging interest in Asian diaspora stories. I joined Te Papa midway through 2019, just months before COVID-19 took over all of our lives. So as you can imagine, I was pretty much thrown in straight away to work documenting the pandemic. And so given both the focus of my role at Te Papa in Asian New Zealand histories, but also I guess my own personal anxiety and upset over what I could see was the resurfacing of more explicit forms of racism in addition to the kind of usual racism that we experience every day. I have to say that I was pretty motivated, much like Bev, to kind of show up and to make sure that at the museum too, we were covering some of the more difficult aspects of the pandemic alongside, all the sourdough making and the teddy bears that was kind of making the news at the time. And I think it was some of this work that ended up bringing Bev and I together. I was and still am actually working on projects like Chinese languages and Aotearoa at Te Papa, which is aimed at kind of generating a more nuanced and diverse representation of the many Chinese communities here in New Zealand as part of the solution, and also making sense of pandemic, which is exploring the experiences of people of diverse Chinese cultural and linguistic heritages and their experiences during COVID-19. So it was Richard Leung, who I have to thank, who's a mutual contact and was then president of the New Zealand Chinese Association, who clearly suspected that there might be some synergies in our work and that the poster competition might be the right time to connect. And he was right. So in a very short amount of time, I got to learn a lot about the way Bev works and the whole kaupapa behind the competition. And I was just really struck by the way that she and the other organizers were harnessing art as part of an evidence-based community response to anti-Chinese and anti-Asian racism, and had taken the care to build that on a Te Tiriti grounded foundation of social justice. So obviously I was very keen to support. And because the competition fell really squarely within what I guess was an area I'd carved out and my team had carved out as a priority area, I felt that the most impactful way that I could support was to propose the winning posters be formally acquired as part of Te Papa's history collection. And to do that, I argued, as I strongly feel, that the posters were a striking and nationally significant record of a creative community response to racism during COVID-19. And because the competition was actually at that moment life. I argued for it to be considered a time-sensitive acquisition, just knowing how all these processes and things work in the museum. So I was really happy when we got the news that it had been approved just as the winners were being announced, and in time to help Bev and the others generate some more media for the competition and its kaupapa. So I really want to acknowledge straight up that my role in this competition has been tiny compared to the work that Bev, Grace W, and the others have put into the competition. But I am chuffed to have played a small role, a small part in that story, and I'm just really honoured to be here today to acknowledge the amazing work that went into the poster competition and take part in this kōrero with you all.
Well, kia ora, Grace. That is wonderful. It's so fantastic to have all of you here. And thank you so much for your beautiful introductions to yourselves and to the work that you do and the continued work that you do in your communities. Bev, did you want to talk a bit more in depth with your presentation about the competition? If you want to bring that up.
Sorry, I was having difficulty unmuting. I don't know if that's
That's okay.
Yes, I thought, yeah, if we could, I thought I'd just briefly overview with some, the dreaded PowerPoint slides, but there are only a few.
That's fine. We're looking forward to it.
And actually, so I just thought I'd overview the basis, the underlying platform for the project, but also I'd like to just finish with just a short video with some of the winning artists' voices, because I think one of the fundamental aspects for this project was to give voice to artists and to others. So yeah, so I will share screen and we will go from there. Sorry.
While you're doing that, I'll just remind everyone who's watching today that if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box, because we will be getting to your questions a bit later on. Thanks, Bev.
So I guess I'm just going to take a few minutes, and this is really the underlying line of sight or logics behind the project. So the key element was that if we do these activities, so it was to promote a competition, and in that competition, Bruce Mahalski and Veronica, I think it's Veronica, developed promotional posters which also had acted as providing an anti-racism, pro-diversity message in themselves for discussion. We had an informative website, and part of that was, sorry about my puppy, part of that was about how to respond to racism in positive ways, and I'm going to just show you a bit of the page of that. But also, for me, it was really important that the competition and the website itself provide sort of a vehicle for all New Zealanders to find out a bit more about the diversity of Chinese Kiwis communities, and in particular that any Chinese person living in New Zealand would see the information and the elements of it would resonate with them. Part of that is because, the youth survey series, and even in the most recent survey, the Youth 19 surveys, found that Chinese young people, rangatahi in particular, don't respond as having pride in their ethnic identities. So it's around about 50–56% relative to other ethnic groups who are in the 80 to 90%. So that's of concern in itself, I believe. And in terms of the context of the times, the anti-Chinese sentiment being expressed, there was a need to better understand who we are and who our community is for the mainstream community as well. So it was to try and meet both those kinds of needs, engaging artists, both school students, new and established, to enter the competition to help give them voice. And also as a competition, it is a vehicle for profile it's a vehicle for giving an outlet for creating artworks of this nature and knowing that they will be seen. There was a public prize giving, there was the public participation in the popular vote, and that was the finalist posters which you saw earlier. They were sent out all over online media, etc., and people could vote on which was their favourite poster. And again, that was to generate the discussion, generate awareness in a positive way. There was the public prize giving event, and Ming Foon, the Race Relations Commissioner, he presented the prizes. The judges were well-known New Zealanders in the arts sector, both practicing artists as well as journalists, etc. And then the winning posters themselves were displayed in city streets nationwide. So the idea was these activities would lead to discussion and understanding about ethnic diversity, more awareness about racist behaviour and how we can do things differently in response. So underpinning the approach as a strength-based approach was the idea that racist behaviour is enabled through the context, the social norms and the values of society. And that actually it is just as important to make statements and act in a way that upholds the values in terms of supporting the targeted person, or just making a statement of your beliefs. You don't necessarily have to argue with the person who's being racist or put yourself in an unsafe space in order to stand up for positive values in our society. So that was part of the element of that. Creating, as I mentioned before, sense of inclusion, kotahitanga by Asian and Chinese Kiwis, and having a initiative of this nature, upstander intervention, so empowering people to actually be supportive, to uphold our norms. Sense of safety for Asian and Chinese New Zealanders and visitors from those things occurring, support for and profiles raised for emerging and established artists, and hopefully that would lead to decreased derogatory and demeaning behaviour towards Asian and Chinese people. I remember early when I was sort of raising this proposal and this idea to some of the community groups, one of the responses was, but how will we know we've made an impact? And I said, we won't. But if we stopped, because it was like the, if not now, when? Because the rhetoric was very alive, anti-Chinese sentiment. And if we wouldn't know, but if this project just stopped things accelerating or stopped one person from acting in a negative way or created someone who was supportive to someone who was being targeted, to me, that's enough. And it's also, I believe, very much a stepping stone as part of the conversation, part of the discussion, part of the relationships that are developed as we go forward. So what I'm just going to quickly do now is just step through a number of slides just to give you an element of what, how the project played out. So as I mentioned before, there were promotional posters which also held responding to racism kind of message. So these were developed with consultation focus groups online. So we put something up and we got feedback. For example, He Waka Kanoa, we're all in this together. Originally we had the English first and someone said, well, hang on, why don't you just do the Māori first? So, you know, those kinds of things actually helped refine and really helped clarify the message and the resonance and how we were doing things. This is the Chinese Kiwis resource page. As part of that, Kirsten Wong and worked with Nigel to develop a, what would I call it, an interwoven look at New Zealand history, primarily before the change in the immigration laws, so from sort of mid-80s back is the main focus. But it is a narrative which intertwines Chinese historical timeline with that for Aotearoa more generally. So we have fundamental milestones such as the signing of Te Tiriti and others as we go through. And we felt that part of that was important in terms of we're not just siloing, oh, this is what happened to Chinese. It was this is part of the bigger picture of Aotearoa. We've got a 2018 census analysis, and part of that again was developed in a way which would resonate across the diverse people, the diversity of Chinese living in New Zealand. We've got poll tax. We had a wee quiz, which I think actually might have been a bit hard for people because there wasn't as much pickup on that as we'd like. So, go visit and see if you can do it. Then the Human Rights Commission. So early on, spoke to the Human Rights Commission because we wouldn't have proceeded if it wasn't something that complemented activities already being done. And so we've got the links to their pages. The Racism is No Joke campaign, which I thought was fantastic. So if you want to have a look at that online, they're just these snippets using humour to really highlight and identify what potentially you could argue has become sort of almost norms in terms of behaviour for some. We have got a bit of an essay around the message behind the promotional posters and how those came together in terms of what I was talking about before, social norms, context, the use of art as a way that people can bring their own perspectives for something where language can trigger reactions where art actually tends to trigger more curiosity and discussion. Bystander intervention, and actually in a really opportune way, Jenny Rankin had just finished her doctorate, which was looking at approaches to using visual memes in terms of anti-racism. And then she had very clear lessons that came through, which was really helpful in a resource for the artists, i.e., you have to be really careful because otherwise you're actually repeating and reiterating the racist messages. If you've got an artist which says, a poster which says, don't do this, this, or this, then what you're actually doing inadvertently is reinforcing the racist message. So she's got six key elements around that. These were the finalist posters which you saw before, and as I mentioned before, there were over 1,000 people that logged on to look at the posters and make their vote. So that was really, really fantastic. Finally, for the 4 winning posters, they were on, the Phantom Bill stickers, and that was a sponsorship by them, which was really, really great because it got it out on the streets. I mean, unfortunately, this was over the COVID era, so the initial posters hit the streets, the promo ones, just as Auckland went into level 3 lockdown. So, so were those sorts of things that we were also navigating at the time. So there's just been a really quick run through because we thought it would be quite good for you guys just to get a sense of what was done as a platform for our discussion later on. And as I said before, one of the key elements of this was the voice for artists. So I'm just going to play you a short clip, which is of the artists and excerpts of their comments from the prize giving. So let's see if this will work.
What had really caught my attention was the purpose of this contest, which was to bring awareness to the racial issues or anti-Chinese sentiments present in New Zealand. And, as a New Zealand-born, ethnically Chinese person, and as someone who has experienced racism and racial prejudice before, this felt very personal, like in that sense. And I think it was that personal element that compelled me to really take the time and put the effort into making this poster. It really does mean a lot to me that a competition like this is able to exist and that there are people who are as passionate about this as I am, because for what has felt like the longest time, nobody has seemed to kind of acknowledge anti-Chinese or anti-Asian racism as an issue because of how normalized these attitudes have become in Western society.
Initially encouraged by a friend to enter this competition because even before, my practice had always been centered around Asian culture. So I thought that this poster competition will be a great opportunity for me to come back to my illustrative style, but this time doing it for a great cause and for the Asian community. My entry is called Unity and Diversity. It displays a TUI and Ko-Fi in the same environment with other Asian elements. I wanted my illustration to convey a community with different backgrounds thriving together harmoniously.
The more I've come to learn about the causes behind this competition, the more honoured I feel to be a part of it. So yeah, thank you all very much. With my design, I wanted to create a simple poster with a strong message. The chain represents strength, and with all the arms of the different races linking together, it demonstrates how we're all stronger together. So yeah, it's a little meaning behind
So
my
I
poster.
wanted to use the imagery of the beautiful tui to symbolize the New Zealanders who has made this country their home, especially with a focus on the Chinese New Zealand community. And in the poster, the tui uses the diverse cultures in the communities to paint Aotearoa to make it into a beautiful, colorful place. And I am a first generation Chinese Kiwi, and so the course of this competition really resonated with me. New Zealand is such a beautiful country full of kind and wonderful people, but I too have experienced racism here. So I really want New Zealand to be a positive and welcoming place that can embrace and celebrate all the different cultural communities. And this competition has given me a voice to address the social issue of racism in Aotearoa. And as an artist, it's really wonderful and exciting to know that my poster can help to make a positive change in the society. And it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be part of this competition.
Thank you so much, Bev. Everything that you were talking, I was furiously writing notes, and it's just so rich, all of the information that you've given us, and it's just providing us a very textured background on the research, on what went into the research of looking at the poster competition. And I'm just going to pivot a bit to Grace Wong and ask her a question, because Bev had mentioned how important relationship building was and the whakawhanonatanga in this entire process. Can you speak to that a bit and how that generated and created the kaupapa for this process, Grace Wong?
Well, we just couldn't have done this project, as Bev said, without all the people and organisations who supported it. It's so heartfelt thanks to all of you, and thanks especially to all of the artists who entered the competition and spent hours and hours and hours conceptualising and creating the exquisite poster art. So a large part of my work for the project was engaging people to come on board, and to do this I used the same approach that Bev used on me. I thought of like-minded, committed people who had some kind of expertise and some kind of personal connection with me, and the project appealed to them for the same reasons it appealed to me. I think the heart of the project was a way of addressing racism that resonated with a lot of diverse and yet somewhat similar people. So most of you who are watching will be familiar with that push and pull in your own communities, that diversity and unity together, which is sometimes tricky. For some people, it was really important that it wasn't confrontational. For others, it was a great opportunity to amplify a message they'd already been working on for a while. And the art-based core was so important because it honoured our underlying tradition of appreciation and respect for culture and the arts. There was something harmonious and strength-based which drew everyone together for the first time in a publicly funded initiative to address racism against Chinese people. It was clearly much more meaningful than just a poster competition. It was a direct response to something very painful that we've talked about already today. And the feelings that the artists expressed through their work and in their words that you've heard are shared by so many of our partners. The other thing was, as you can see, the project was very clearly presented and laid out. The people that I know are well versed in innovation, project design, logistics. It's practical with the promotional material, with the information about how to safely address racism. Our partners, you know what works, and you know your communities, and so I feel like the project, satisfied everyone on many different levels, their brains, their hearts, their communities, aspirations. And at the end of the day, they were so happy when they saw the beautiful work that the artists created. So their faith in the project was 100% justified by that beautiful, lasting legacy, I think, yeah. So it wasn't hard to bring people on board at all.
Oh, thank you, Grace. Yeah, that's it's such a beautiful, beautiful way of bringing lots of people together and just having all these wonderful skills together and moving forward. Bev, did you want to add something to that?
I think a key element around that also was, I mean, I'm Wellington based and Grace Wong is Auckland based, and there were the networks up there which she brought together, which was just, there were the established relationships and that trust, which then enabled Grace to make those connections really quickly. So just bear in mind that this project, Bruce and I had that conversation in March, April 2020. Then we had the really fast round of conversations with communities and the kaupapa about kaupapa. Then we went for funding. We got funding agreement on beginning of July. Competition went live end of August, because we wanted to have it in a space where school students weren't asked to submit in the last term of the school year, even though, you know, the school year was totally very fragmented and very messy in that COVID year of 2020 and, you know, the following on one. And I think key was establishing a collaborative endeavour which reflected the diversity of Chinese communities. So the New Zealand Chinese Association, who provided the umbrella for the funding application and that administrative aspect, the Asian Family Services, who connected up and had a strong social media presence in terms of the Chinese communities use and Mandarin speaking as a promotional conversation around the kaupapa, and then that broadening out with the Asian Network Incorporated to actually connect up and resonate the focus on Chinese New Zealanders to that broader Asian community and aspect, because, you know, the anti-Chinese aspect was very much an anti-Asian rhetoric that was occurring. Yeah, so I think that was really important. Yeah, and I think Grace, she having the kanohi kind of connections when she could was fantastic, because it makes, to me, that's really quite different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, yeah.
And just another little thing. I know, Grace Gassin, when you were saying your role was little, your role has been, and that recognition about where this isn't just a poster competition and how it sat within the landscape, really made a huge difference to this project in terms of its profile, in terms of its legacy moving forward, and in terms of, I think, that idea of Chinese community or Asian community voice as legitimate. And I think that relates to your role, which is, as I understand it, more recently, you know, in the past few years, one that's been established within Te Papa. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
That's a beautiful segue. Thank you, Bev, because I was going to ask Grace Gassin if you can just speak a little bit to museums and the role or the roles that museums can play in these types of initiatives across different communities.
Sure. First, just to respond to Bev, I mean, it was because you had done all of that work to articulate the project and its kaupapa, and, you know, I sort of joined in kind of relatively late in the process, so you had that all laid out, so it was really easy to actually see if all the work that had gone into it. So, you know, just got to hand that back to you, Bev. That was all you too. So, but in terms of the role that museums can play, so bear in mind that at Te Papa there are two teams that probably have bearing on this type of work. There's the art team at Te Papa, but I'm part of the history team. So the way that we look at and value art might be quite different to if you had one of the art curators here, but that's sort of just a technical aside. That said, from my perspective, I think museums can play several really important supporting roles. So the first is that I think that we can work against what I kind of see as the erasure of community initiatives sometimes in our histories, and all the labour and the effort and the leadership that goes into that. And I think we can do that at Te Papa, especially in the national context, but I think museums generally, however they're placed, by recognizing that these projects are nationally or regionally significant, and we can document and support them as such and give them that respect. I also think that we can hire a contract, involve, and ourselves take inspiration from community initiatives. I think there's just so much to learn there, and I think often, other organizations, larger organizations, feel like they have to be in the lead on things, but it's not necessarily the case that we're the ones fit to lead. Sometimes it's better for us to take inspiration and see how we can arrange our organizational goals to sort of support and align with what communities have already shown us that they want and are asking for. So that's another way I think we could support. And just, I think in a Te Tiriti context, I think it's also quite valuable for museums to think about how we can provide a platform for and also to document grassroots and community initiatives that work against what I feel is sometimes a quite distorted narrative that sort of implies that, say, Asian Māori or other groups and Māori relations are inherently divisive or tense. And I do put emphasis on community initiatives because I think it's particularly powerful for people to see examples like this competition of initiatives where communities are themselves able to directly speak about their own issues and needs, but are able to do so in ways that also uphold Te Tiriti without mediation necessarily by Pākehā or other outside players. Because I think that, I guess, far too often racialized groups are represented as naturally competitive or anti each other, and that's used as justification for why we require outside mediators. But seeing that other alternatives are possible, I think is really vital for what we do in the future.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Grace. I just have one sort of last question for all of you before I go to the Q&A from our audience. And the question is, were there any outcomes that surprised you? Were there any sort of anything that you weren't expecting?
I think for me, one of the things that helped me a lot was understanding where I, as a Chinese person and the forever foreigner in a country which has a treaty as really the constitutional foundation, it helped me think through myself in that context and to understand that Te Tiriti is for all of us, and where I sit in the context on the Pākehā side of the treaty and how that works with tangata whenua. And for me, believing that honouring the treaty is the only way forward for us to work as a harmonious society. Yeah, and so it just helped me with all of that thinking. So yeah, thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Grace. I'm just going to read out a question from one of the attendees, and any one of you three can answer this. How can we promote and share these posters and the kaupapa with mainstream New Zealand, rather than just for those of us who already support these kinds of initiatives? Yeah, Bev.
Yeah. So the research actually on effectiveness of anti-racism campaign does say that it's more effective if you can engage with mainstream community. And so that was something which we were less successful at achieving in many ways. And I think we've made the 4 winning posters are freely available to download from the poster competition website. We've also written a report, and available. Grace primarily has been the lead on that, which documents this mahi and the steps that were taken as a way of providing, I suppose, a resource for others to do something similar if they wish to, or to pick up on an opportunity using sort of some of the resources and the lessons that we have learnt along the way from running this competition. I had a look at the potential for sponsorship, which would come from the mainstream. But actually what I've realised is it is really hard. One of the things I think is getting I suppose, non-Chinese involved in the project and the project team. And the lesson I learned is that you have to be really, you have to take the time to ensure that everybody is in the same mindset in terms of what community means and community voice. Yeah, I'll leave that at that, but I learned some sharp lessons on that one as part of this project. It is tricky. It is tricky.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Bev. Grace, did you have a response to that?
I think just to kind of, I have to say Bev is really right on that. You know, even though I work at Te Papa, it can still be really hard to reach mainstream audiences on things. And I mean, there are other kinds of issues too, but I guess even when you do have a platform where you can reach mainstream audiences, you know, you can only lead a horse to water. You can't force it to drink, you know. So I sort of feel that what they're saying around building relationships with people outside our communities, that's really vital. But I also do think to some extent that just carrying on with some of the work that we do makes a difference in the long run. It's like playing the long game, because if you're always waiting for people, you know, that's stagnation in a way. But even I think a lot of the progress that you do make with these types of initiatives, it might not be apparent in the moment, but you know, you keep going, and then people realize that something's shifted, and then they're compelled to catch up to the new normal. So that's kind of how I see these types of things reaching mainstream audiences, maybe not immediately in the moment, but the sort of compounding effect that comes with people being inspired perhaps by this project and then doing another project, and they build relationships, and all of that little work that happens collectively added up does help to create change that affects all of us, including others in mainstream society.
So we invite anyone who wishes to. I just saw a wee chat note about the potential to use these posters they're in as high a resolution, I think, as I could on our website, but they're under a Creative Commons. So you can use any of the posters for any non-commercial need or purpose, positive purpose, I'm going to go, that you wish to, provided that it's the whole poster, you haven't sort of cut part of it away, and that there's an attribution aspect to it. If you did want to adapt one, then yeah, get in touch with us, and we'll check in with the artists themselves about the potential of something else occurring. Yeah,
there are ways that people can stumble across the posters on Te Papa as well through our collections, through collections online. So all of our objects and things go up there, and because they're officially part of our collection, so I did a little bit of sort of interviewing to create mini web entries on each of the posters. So if people are, say, going into Te Papa and they go to the COVID-19 collection of objects that we have, so if teachers do that, for instance, those posters will turn up on that page, and so, you know, people can click into them and find out a little bit more about the artist's motivations and a little bit about the competition. So there are a few, hopefully, different places that people can find their way to them.
Oh, thank you for that, Grace. And we just have just one more question. Thank you, everybody who's asked questions. We will let the presenters know what your questions are, and you'll be able to see your questions in the recordings. But I just have one last question for all of you. If you have one bit of advice to give to other communities who are inspired now by the work that you've done and this type of an art initiative, what would you say to them, to a community who thinks, oh, this looks like something that maybe we could do as well? How would you sort of set them on their path or support them in doing that?
we more than welcome people to come and have a chat with us, I think, as a part of it. I don't think I can answer that because we have learned so much, honestly, in doing that. And I guess for me, from a point of view of lessons learned, so my connect in the Te Tiriti space and understanding framing and how I do my how I approach things is through my work in the public sector. And so I've got a lot of connections and relationships established over time in the public sector, but not in the art space. And that's the lesson that I learned, was that, and that's totally different, right? And so we were kind of running at times, hi Grace, Wong, in terms of ensuring that we could get the input, get the reflection, and have the conversation. So actually from that angle, it isn't what we like. Think about appropriation, right? Some of the posters that came through and needing to work through those elements. So as much as we had views, it wasn't our view that held sway. We had to go, it was essential that we go and get additional input from a Māori creative person before, you know, we could go ahead in terms of working through how we, processed and judged and listed the posters. Did you have something to say with that, Grace?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the core of the competition did speak to people across the board, and you can see from the artists who entered, they were from the whole spectrum of New Zealand, the New Zealand communities, because it was an outlet for good people to express themselves no matter where and who they came from. So it was very inclusive, I think, yeah.
I think I'd have to speak to this in a more general sense, since I wasn't involved in all the mahi that went behind the poster competition. But in terms of my own involvement in community projects, I would say a couple of things maybe. First would probably be to think about the relationships that you've already had in terms of who you've worked with and who you trust and who you know sort of has the kind of vision and criticality that you want to see and the kinds of projects that you have. And often they will know other people as well who might be really good to bring on board or have a different perspective about the direction of something. So I would probably start there, because who you're going to work with and those relationships are so vital. And the other thing is actually just to think about what already exists. So just to do a little bit of research beforehand, because there's really no point in starting something if something already exists that is really great. And then you have to ask yourself, would it be better for me to support that mahi? Or, you know, is there actually a real need for something and you want to be able, and you're the right person to, you know, address that. So maybe asking those kinds of questions right at the outset, that would be my advice. And then the rest is all about learning as you go, I think.
Mm. And I think acknowledging context. Sorry, I'm just going to just say to you, because right at the start, when we were thinking about this project, it was when the Black Lives Matters sort of had raised its profile and discussion, etc. And one of the comments from the Chinese communities was, well, who are we to be having this sort of initiative now? Shouldn't all the focus be on the Black Lives Matter, Te Tiriti, you know, Te Māori concerns? And I went and spoke to various Māori researchers, public sector people, relationships that I had in a range of ways. And the response was very, very positive in terms of going ahead with the initiative. And there was a resonance in terms of similar systemic sort of racism, but also from that angle, it was the concept of acknowledging context. So if you go and have a look at our website, we've got a very, very clear statement about the you know, primary and present urgency in terms of Te Tiriti and the racism in terms of Māori as tangata whenua.
Thank you. Thanks, Bev. We're going to have to close it for today because we're closing in on 12 o'clock, but I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you and the absolutely amazing work that is going on. We so appreciate it, and we recognize you all as leaders in your communities, and Totoko, the mahi that you're doing, the mahi that you continue to do. So thank you so much. For those of you watching, there will be a recording available shortly from this webinar today. And please feel free to share the recording widely once you've received it. If you haven't joined our e-news, we do invite you to join our e-news so you can get the latest information on our upcoming webinars and our podcast channel. If you are a community researcher or evaluator, we also invite you to join our researcher database and to upload your research. We will be sending out a short survey, and we would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind filling that out and sending that back with some feedback about today's webinar. I'd like to close today with a karakia. Ka whakaria te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kai turuki whakataha ai, kai turuki whakataha ai, hui e, tai ki e. Restrictions are moved aside, so the pathway is clear to return to everyday activities, enriched, unified, and blessed. Thank you, everyone. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, no hurumai.